The needle pierced through the worn wool with such practiced precision that Eliza Wright barely had to look at her hands anymore, which was fortunate because her eyes kept drifting toward the tall stranger standing in her doorway, hat in hand, looking more uncertain than any cowboy had a right to. "My socks, madam," he said again, his voice rough like wind over prairie grass. "I know it's an odd request, but the boarding house said you were the best with a needle in all of Centralia, and I've been walking holes through everything I own for the past 3 months. Eliza set down the shirt she had been working on and studied him properly. He was broad-shouldered and sun-weathered, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His clothes were clean but showed the wear of a man who spent more time in the saddle than anywhere else. The year was 1878, and Centralia, Kansas was still rough enough around the edges that a woman living alone had to be careful about who she let into her home. "You can leave them on the porch," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "I'll have them ready by tomorrow evening." The cowboy shifted his weight from one boot to the other. "Actually, madam, I was hoping to wait. They're the only pair I've got left that aren't completely beyond saving, and I'm supposed to ride out at dawn tomorrow. I'd be happy to pay extra for the trouble." Something in his voice made her relent. Maybe it was the genuine embarrassment in his tone, or maybe it was just that she had been alone in this little house on the edge of town for too long, with only her needle and thread for company. Her husband had died 2 years ago, thrown from a spooked horse, and since then her days had fallen into a predictable rhythm of mending and loneliness. "Fine," she said, stepping back from the door. "You can wait on the porch. I'll bring them out when I'm finished." "Thank you kindly, madam." "Name's Preston Oliver, by the way." "Eliza Wright." He nodded and settled himself on the wooden steps outside while she closed the door most of the way, leaving it open just enough to be proper. She took the socks he had left on the threshold and carried them to her chair by the window. They were in worse shape than she had expected, with holes worn through the heels and toes, but the wool was good quality and worth saving. As her needle began its familiar dance through the fabric, she found herself wondering about Preston Oliver. He had the look of a ranch hand, but something about the way he carried himself suggested more than that. His gun belt was well maintained but not flashy, and his hands, when he had held out the socks, had shown the calluses of hard work but also a certain carefulness. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Through the open door, she could hear Preston shifting on the porch, the creak of wood under his weight. He started humming something low and tuneless, and despite herself, Eliza smiled. She worked in silence for nearly an hour, her stitches small and even, reinforcing the worn places and darning the holes with thread that matched the original wool as closely as possible. It was meditative work, the kind that let her mind wander to places she usually kept locked away during the busy daylight hours. "Madam," Preston's voice drifted through the door. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I was wondering if you might have some water to spare. It's been a long day." Eliza set down her work and fetched the pitcher from her kitchen, pouring a cup and bringing it out to the porch. Preston stood when she appeared, taking the cup with a grateful nod. "You're not from around here," she observed, leaning against the door frame. "No, madam." "I'm from Texas originally, but I've been working ranches all through Kansas and Nebraska for the past few years. Just signed on with the Bar 7 Ranch outside of town. That's the Patterson place. Good people, so I've heard." He drank deeply, then looked at her with those creek water eyes. "And you? Are you from Centralia, born and raised?" "My father was the blacksmith before he passed. My husband took over the shop, and when he died, his brother came up from Missouri to run it." She did not know why she was telling him all this. Perhaps it was just nice to have someone to talk to who was not asking her to hem their skirts or patch their work shirts. Preston handed back the empty cup. "I'm sorry for your loss. It's been 2 years. Life goes on." But even as she said it, she wondered if that was really true. Her life had not so much gone on as simply continued, each day bleeding into the next without much distinction or joy. She returned to her mending, and the evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket. When she finally finished the second sock, the sky had deepened to purple and the first stars were beginning to appear. She examined her work with a critical eye, then nodded in satisfaction. The socks would last him another few months at least, maybe longer if he was careful. "All done," she called out, and Preston appeared at the door immediately, as if he had been waiting just out of sight. She handed him the socks and he turned them over in his hands, studying the neat rows of stitches with what seemed like genuine admiration. "Madam, this is fine work." "Better than fine. You've practically made them new again." "That'll be 20 cents, she said, though the going rate was usually 15. Preston pulled a silver dollar from his pocket and pressed it into her palm. "Keep the change. It's worth it not to have blisters tomorrow. That's too much." "No, madam. It's just right." He hesitated, rolling the socks up carefully. "Miss Wright, I was wondering if maybe I could impose on you again sometime. I've got a shirt that's missing most of its buttons and some pants that could use reinforcing at the knees. I'd be happy to pay fair prices, and I promise to be a respectable customer." Eliza found herself nodding before she had really thought it through. "Come by on Sunday afternoon. I don't take work on the Sabbath morning, but after church I'm free. I'll be here. Thank you again, madam. You've saved me a lot of pain tomorrow." He settled his hat back on his head and touched the brim in a gesture of farewell, then walked off into the gathering darkness, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Eliza stood in her doorway long after he had disappeared from view, the silver dollar warm in her hand, feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. It took her a moment to identify it as anticipation. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a warm breeze that carried the smell of prairie grass and wildflowers. Eliza wore her best dress to church, a deep blue cotton that she had sewn herself, and found her attention wandering during the sermon. Reverend Thompson was talking about the parable of the lost sheep, but her mind kept drifting to the cowboy with the worn-out socks and the kind eyes. After the service, she hurried home to change into her work dress and tidy up the front room. She had just finished arranging her sewing basket when she heard boots on the porch steps. Through the window, she could see Preston approaching, a bundle of clothing tucked under one arm. "Good afternoon, Miss Wright," he said when she opened the door. He had cleaned up since she had last seen him, his hair still damp from washing and his shirt freshly pressed. "I hope I'm not too early. Right on time." She gestured for him to come inside this time, propriety be damned. The whole town already knew she did mending work for half the men in Centralia. One more customer would not raise any eyebrows. Preston stepped into her front room with the careful movements of a large man in a small space. He looked around with obvious interest, taking in the neat rows of thread spools on the shelf, the basket of fabric scraps by her chair, the samplers she had stitched as a girl hanging on the walls. "You've got a real nice place here," he said. "It suits me." Eliza took the bundle of clothes from him and began sorting through them. The shirt was indeed missing most of its buttons, and the pants had worn thin at the knees and seat. There was also a vest with a torn pocket and a jacket with a split seam along the shoulder. "This will take a few hours at least. I've got time. Is it all right if I wait outside again? You can wait in here if you like. There's a chair by the window that gets good light for reading if you've got a book." Preston shook his head. Never learned my letters properly. Can read enough to get by, but nothing that would fill an afternoon. I could read to you, Eliza heard herself offer. I've got a copy of Mr. Dickens' Great Expectations that I've been working through. His face lit up with such genuine pleasure that she felt her heart do an odd little skip. I'd like that very much, madam. So they settled into an unexpected afternoon together, Eliza in her mending chair with Preston's shirt across her lap, and Preston in the reading chair by the window, listening with rapt attention as she read about Pip and his mysterious benefactor. Her voice rose and fell with the rhythm of the story, and her needle moved in time with her words, creating its own kind of poetry in thread and fabric. When she paused to rest her voice, Preston said, "You read real beautiful, Miss Wright. Makes the whole thing come alive. My mother taught me. She believed women should be educated, even out here on the frontier." Eliza threaded her needle with brown thread to match the shirt's buttons. "My father thought it was foolish, said I'd only need to know enough to read the Bible and write letters, but Mother insisted." "Your mother was a wise woman." "She was. She died when I was 16, but I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm reading." Eliza attached a button with quick, efficient stitches. She would have liked these books. "My husband thought they were frivolous, but he never stopped me from reading them." "What was he like? Your husband, I mean, if you don't mind my asking." Eliza considered the question. "James was a good man, steady. He worked hard and provided well. We had a comfortable life together." "But did you love him?" The bluntness of the question startled her, and she looked up from her sewing to find Preston watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I cared for him very much," she said carefully. "That's not the same thing." "No," she admitted. "It's not." They fell silent after that, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Eliza continued reading after a while, and the afternoon slipped away in a companionable haze of words and stitches. By the time she finished the last repair, the sun was starting to set again, painting her front room in shades of rose and gold. Preston examined each piece of clothing with the same careful attention he had given the socks, running his fingers over her neat stitches and testing the strength of the buttons. "You've got magic in those hands, Miss Wright. Just practice and patience. No, it's more than that." He held up the shirt, looking at where she had reinforced the collar and cuffs. "You don't just fix things. You make them better than they were. You see what they could be and you make it real." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. There was a wistfulness in his expression, a longing that seemed to go beyond appreciation for good needlework. "That's kind of you to say," she managed. Preston paid her generously again, and this time when he asked if he could come back, she said yes without hesitation. "I'm sure I'll have more things that need mending before long," he said. "A working cowboy is hard on his clothes. I'll be here." After he left, Eliza sat in the growing darkness of her front room, not bothering to light a lamp. She could still smell the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to Preston, still hear the low rumble of his voice as he had listened to her read. Something was shifting inside her, like ice breaking up on a river in spring, and she was not sure whether to be frightened or exhilarated by it. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Preston would find reasons to visit, sometimes with legitimate mending work, sometimes with tasks that Eliza suspected he invented just to have an excuse to sit in her front room. She would sew and read, and he would listen and talk, and slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. She learned that he had left Texas after his parents died of fever, that he had a younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Denver, that his favorite food was apple pie, and he had once broken his arm falling out of a hayloft when he was 12. He learned that she loved thunderstorms, that she had always wanted to see the ocean, that she had married James because it seemed like the sensible thing to do and had regretted it almost immediately, though she had tried her best to be a good wife. "You ever think about leaving Centralia?" Preston asked one afternoon in late summer. He was sitting on her porch steps, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird while she mended a tear in his work shirt. "Sometimes," Eliza admitted, "but this is my home. My parents are buried here. My whole life is here." "A life can be anywhere you make it. Is that why you keep moving? Because you're looking for the right place to make a life?" Preston was quiet for a long moment, the knife stilling in his hands. "I think maybe I've been looking for the right person, not the right place." Eliza's needle paused mid-stitch. "Preston, I know it's too soon to be saying such things," he continued, still not looking at her. "I know you're probably not ready to hear them. But Miss Wright, Eliza, I need you to know that these past few weeks, sitting here with you, listening to you read, watching you work, it's been the best time of my whole life. You make me want to stop wandering. You make me want to stay put and build something real." Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "I'm 32 years old," she said. "I'm a widow. I've got nothing to offer except a small house and a talent for mending. You've got everything that matters." Finally, he turned to look at her, and the raw honesty in his face took her breath away. "You're smart and kind and strong. You see beauty in broken things. You've got hope even after everything you've lost. That's more than most people can say. You barely know me. I know enough. I know that my heart beats faster when I turn onto your street. I know that I spend my whole day looking forward to seeing you. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out after a week of rain." Eliza set down her mending with trembling hands. "What are you asking me, Preston?" "I'm asking if you might consider letting me court you properly. I'm asking if maybe you feel even a fraction of what I feel. I'm asking for a chance." She stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the dusty street and the scattered buildings of Centralia. She had lived here her whole life, had walked these same roads, seen these same faces, fallen into the same routines day after day. The thought of change terrified her. But the thought of sending Preston away, of going back to her quiet, lonely existence, terrified her even more. "I do feel something," she said quietly. "I have for weeks now. But Preston, I'm scared." He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "So am I. But I think sometimes the scariest things are the ones most worth doing." She turned to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. "All right, yes, you can court me." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Thank you," he said softly. "I swear to you, Eliza, you won't regret this." And standing there on her porch in the fading afternoon light, with the whole uncertain future stretching out before them, Eliza believed him. The courting was slow and proper, just as it should be in a town like Centralia, where everyone knew everyone else's business. Preston would come to supper twice a week, always bringing something to contribute, a rabbit he had shot or vegetables from the ranch's garden. They would walk together to church on Sundays, and afterward he would sit with her in her front room, sometimes reading aloud from the newspaper, sometimes just talking about his week. He was patient with her in a way that James had never been, content to let her set the pace of their relationship. When he finally kissed her for the first time, it was a cool evening in October, and they had been sitting on her porch watching the stars come out. He had taken her hand carefully, as if she might shatter, and leaned in slowly enough that she could have pulled away if she wanted to. But she did not want to. She wanted to feel his lips on hers, wanted to know what it was like to be kissed by a man she actually loved. And when their mouths finally met, It was everything she had read about in books but never experienced, a warmth that spread from her lips through her entire body, making her feel alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. "I love you," Preston whispered against her mouth. "I think I've loved you since the first moment I saw you, sitting there with that needle in your hand, looking at me like I was crazy for asking you to mend my socks." Eliza laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. "I thought you were crazy. Who waits around while someone mends their socks? A man who knows an opportunity when he sees one." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Marry me, Eliza. I know it's only been a few months, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "Yes," she said, because there was no other answer her heart would allow. "Yes, Preston, I'll marry you." They were wed in November on a bright cold day when the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at it. Eliza wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale green with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Preston wore his best suit, the one he had been saving for special occasions. The ceremony was simple, held in the little church where Eliza had attended services her whole life, with half the town in attendance. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them man and wife, Preston kissed her with such enthusiasm that several people in the congregation laughed and cheered. Eliza felt her cheeks burn, but she could not stop smiling, could not contain the joy that seemed to fill her up until she thought she might burst with it. They spent their first night as husband and wife in Eliza's little house, which was now their house, and Preston was gentle with her in the darkness, his hands reverent on her body. "I'll take care of you," he promised. "For the rest of my life I'll take care of you." "And I'll take care of you," Eliza whispered back, thinking of all the ways she already had, with needle and thread and patient attention. The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Preston continued working at the Bar 7 ranch, and Eliza continued her mending work, though now she also cooked and cleaned for two, and found herself humming while she worked. Preston would come home in the evening smelling of horses and hay, and she would have supper waiting, and they would sit together and talk about their days. In the evenings, she would often find herself mending his clothes, just as she had those first few times. His socks still wore through at the heels, his shirt collars still frayed, his pants still split at the seams. But now when she repaired them, it felt different, like an act of love rather than simple commerce. One cold February evening, she was sitting by the fire with a pair of his socks, the needle moving in and out of the worn wool with practiced ease. Preston was watching her from his chair, his expression soft and contemplative. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, glancing up at him. "Just watching you work. You're so careful with everything, so precise. You mend those socks like they're precious. They are precious. They're yours." Preston got up and came to kneel beside her chair. He took one of her hands, stilling the needle, and looked up at her with those creek water eyes that she loved so much. "Eliza, you mend my socks with such care," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wish you could mend my heart the same way." She felt her breath catch. "Your heart." "Is it broken?" "It was," he said. "Before I met you, I was just drifting, lost. I didn't have a home or a purpose or anyone who cared whether I lived or died. My heart was in pieces, Eliza, scattered across half the West. But then I found you, and you started putting me back together, one stitch at a time, just like you do with these socks." Eliza set down her mending and cupped his face in her hands. "Preston, you've done the same for me. I was so alone before you came. I thought I would spend the rest of my life just existing, going through the motions. But you made me feel again. You made me want things again." "Then we mended each other," he said, smiling. "I suppose we did." She leaned down to kiss him, and the socks fell forgotten to the floor. As winter gave way to spring, Eliza began to notice changes in her body. Her monthly courses stopped, and her breasts became tender. She felt tired in the mornings and queasy at odd times of the day. She knew what it meant, but she waited a few more weeks to be sure before telling Preston. When she finally did, on a warm April evening while they were washing the supper dishes together, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way down the street, then picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby. You're happy then?" "Happy. Eliza, I'm over the moon. I'm walking on clouds. He trailed off, his eyes suddenly wet. "I'm going to be a father. I never thought I'd get to be a father." "Well, you better start thinking about it because come October, that's exactly what you'll be." The pregnancy was not easy. Eliza was sick for the first few months, and as she grew larger, everything became more difficult. But Preston was attentive and patient, taking on more of the household chores without complaint, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, reading to her when she was too tired to hold a book herself. In September, a month before the baby was due, Preston came home with news. "Mr. Patterson offered me a promotion," he said, hanging up his hat. "He wants me to be his foreman. It would mean more money and steadier hours." "Preston, that's wonderful. There's just one catch. He wants us to move out to the ranch itself. There's a foreman's house, bigger than this one, with good land around it. He said we could have a garden, maybe keep some chickens." Eliza felt a pang at the thought of leaving her little house, the home she had shared first with James and then with Preston, where she had built her life and her business. But she also knew that this was an opportunity they could not pass up, especially with a baby on the way. "When would we need to move?" "Not until after the baby comes. Mr. Patterson understands that you can't be hauling furniture around in your condition." "Then we'll do it," she decided. "We'll move to the ranch." Their son was born on a crisp October morning, arriving just as the sun was rising over the prairie. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Eliza was certain she would not survive it. But Preston stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in her arms, Eliza felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. "He's perfect," Preston said, his voice choked with emotion. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Philip James Oliver, after Preston's father and Eliza's late husband. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes, and from the very beginning, he had a temperament that was all his own, fussy and demanding and utterly beloved. The move to the ranch happened in November, when Philip was a month old. Preston and some of the other ranch hands transported their belongings in 2 wagon loads, and by evening they were installed in the foreman's house. It was indeed bigger than their previous home, with 2 bedrooms and a large kitchen, and windows that looked out over rolling hills of prairie grass. Eliza stood in the doorway of their new home, holding Philip against her shoulder, and felt a strange mixture of grief and excitement. This was the future, this ranch house in the middle of nowhere, far from the town where she had spent her entire life. But it was also an adventure, a new chapter, and she was ready for it. "What do you think?" Preston asked, coming to stand beside her. "I think it's perfect," she said honestly. "I think we're going to be very happy here." And they were. The first year at the ranch was busy and exhausting, with Preston learning his new responsibilities and Eliza adjusting to life as both a mother and a ranch foreman's wife. But it was also deeply satisfying. Preston thrived in his new role, his natural leadership abilities finally having an outlet. The ranch hands respected him, and Mr. Patterson relied on his judgment for more and more decisions. Eliza found her own place in the ranch community. She still did mending work, but now it was for the ranch hands and their families, a way to earn extra money and keep her skills sharp. She also started a vegetable garden behind the house, and by the second summer, she was producing enough to feed her own family and sell the surplus at the market in Centralia. Philip grew into a sturdy, curious toddler, always underfoot, and always getting into things he should not. Preston was a devoted father, spending every free moment playing with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle and the wide prairie that surrounded them. One evening, when Philip was about 2 years old, Eliza was mending Preston's socks again. It had become a kind of ritual for them, this quiet domestic task that had brought them together in the first place. Preston was sitting across from her, whittling a wooden horse for Philip, and the boy himself was asleep in his cradle by the fire. "You ever think about that first day?" Preston asked suddenly. "When I showed up at your door with my worn-out socks and my desperate request," Eliza smiled. "All the time, I thought you were the strangest man I had ever met. And I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Still do, actually. Even with flour in my hair and baby spit up on my dress, especially then." He set down his whittling and came to kneel beside her chair, just as he had that night when he had talked about mending his heart. "Eliza, I want you to know something. These past few years with you and Philip, they've been the happiest of my life. Every morning I wake up and I can't believe this is real, that I get to live this life with you." "I feel the same way," she said softly. "Before you, I didn't know what it meant to really love someone. James was kind to me, but what we had was nothing like this. I'm glad I waited for you," Preston said. "I'm glad I didn't settle for something less, even when I was lonely and thought I'd never find anyone. And I'm glad you needed your socks mended." They both laughed at that, and Preston pulled her into a kiss that was deep and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza rested her forehead against his. "I want to have another baby," she said. Preston's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" "Philip should have brothers and sisters, and I loved being pregnant, even though it was hard. I loved feeling the baby move inside me, knowing that we were creating a whole new person together." "Then we'll have another baby," Preston said. "As many as you want." Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Louise, was born in the spring of 1882. She was smaller than Philip had been, with blonde hair that came from neither parent and a sunny disposition that made her the darling of the entire ranch. Philip, now nearly 4, was fascinated by his baby sister and would sit for hours just watching her sleep. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Preston continued to excel as foreman, and when Mr. Patterson's health began to decline, he increasingly turned to Preston for advice on running the ranch. Eliza's garden flourished, and she began raising chickens and selling eggs. The mending work continued, a constant thread running through her days. In 1884, their third child was born, another son they named Samuel Preston Oliver. He was the easiest of the 3 babies, sleeping through the night almost from the beginning and rarely fussing. Philip and Emma both adored him, and Eliza often found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for the family she had built with Preston. One particularly memorable evening in the summer of 1885, when Philip was 6, Emma was 3, and Samuel was 1, the whole family was sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Preston had Philip on his knee, telling him stories about the cattle drives he had been on when he was younger, while Eliza nursed Samuel and Emma played with her rag doll. "Papa, will you take me on a cattle drive someday?" Philip asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "When you're older, absolutely," Preston promised. "But you've got to learn to ride better first and learn how to rope cattle." "I can learn. I'll practice every day." Preston ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "I know you will, buddy. You're going to be a fine cowboy someday." Eliza caught Preston's eye and smiled. This was the life she had never known she wanted, this noisy, chaotic, love-filled existence on a ranch in the middle of Kansas. It was so far from the quiet, lonely days of her widowhood, so different from the careful, passionless marriage she had endured with James. That night, after the children were all asleep, Preston found Eliza in the kitchen, washing the supper dishes. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I love our life," he said simply. "So do I. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had gone to someone else that day to get my socks mended. What if I had never met you?" Eliza turned in his arms to face him. "But you did meet me, and I met you, and everything else is just speculation. I know, but I'm so grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful for every single moment that led me to your door." They stood there in the warm kitchen, holding each other, and Eliza thought about all the small moments that had brought them to this point. The worn-out socks, the afternoons of reading, the slow building of trust and affection, the moment when he had asked her to mend his heart the same way she mended his clothes. She had done that, she realized. They had done it for each other, taking the broken pieces of their lonely lives and stitching them together into something whole and beautiful. The years continued to pass in a blur of work and family and love. Mr. Patterson died in 1887, and to everyone's surprise, he left the ranch to Preston. His own children had moved east years ago and had no interest in ranching, and he had come to think of Preston as the son he wished he had. "I can't accept this," Preston said, staring at the deed in his hands. "It's too much." But the lawyer assured him that the will was ironclad, and Mr. Patterson had been very specific about his wishes. The ranch was Preston's, all 5,000 acres of it, along with the cattle and horses and equipment. Eliza stood beside her husband, looking at the paper that represented a future she had never imagined. "We can do this," she said firmly. "You know this ranch inside and out. You've been running it for years already. This just makes it official. But the responsibility, Eliza. If I fail, we lose everything. You won't fail, and even if you did, we'd still have each other and the children. That's what matters." So Preston became a ranch owner, and they renamed the property the Oliver Ranch. It was hard work, harder than anything either of them had done before, but they thrived. Preston proved to be as skilled at managing the business side of ranching as he was at the practical aspects, and within a few years, they had paid off all the debts and were turning a healthy profit. Their family continued to grow. In 1888, they had another daughter, Mary Catherine, and in 1890, their last child, a son named Thomas David. With 5 children ranging in age from infant to 12, the house was always full of noise and activity. Eliza sometimes felt overwhelmed by the demands on her time and energy, but she also felt deeply fulfilled. This was the life she was meant to live, surrounded by people she loved, doing work that mattered. The mending continued, but now she also taught her daughters to sew, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her. One fall evening in 1892, when the children were all occupied with various activities, and Preston had a rare moment of free time, he found Eliza in her sewing room. She was working on a quilt made from scraps of fabric left over from various projects, each piece holding a memory. "Is that from my old work shirt?" Preston asked, pointing to a faded blue square. "The one you were wearing the day you proposed." I could never bring myself to throw it away, even after it was too worn to repair. Preston sat down beside her, watching as she carefully stitched the pieces together. "You know what I was thinking about today, that thing I said to you about mending my heart." "I remember." "I've been thinking about how true that was. You really did mend me, Eliza. You took all my broken pieces and put them back together, stronger than they were before." Eliza set down her needle and took his hand. "You did the same for me. I was so lost when we met, so disconnected from my own life. You gave me a reason to feel again, to hope again. We were both pretty broken, weren't we? I suppose we were. But we found each other and we fixed each other, and now look at us. We have this beautiful life, these wonderful children, this ranch. We have everything." Preston pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "And it all started with a pair of worn-out socks. The best pair of socks I ever mended." They sat together in companionable silence, Eliza returning to her quilt and Preston just watching her work. Outside, they could hear the children playing, Philip teaching his younger siblings how to skip stones in the creek that ran behind the house. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. As the years went on, the Oliver Ranch became one of the most successful in the county. Preston's fair treatment of his workers and his shrewd business decisions earned him respect throughout Kansas, and he was often called upon to advise other ranchers. Eliza became known not just for her mending but also for her hospitality, and the ranch house was frequently full of guests. Their children grew into capable, kind young people. Philip, as predicted, became an excellent cowboy and took on more and more responsibility at the ranch. Emma showed a talent for working with horses and dreamed of breeding thoroughbreds someday. Samuel was the quietest of the children, preferring books to ranch work, and Eliza encouraged his academic interests. Mary was bold and adventurous, always getting into scrapes, and Thomas, the baby, was gentle and sweet-natured. In 1895, when Philip was 17 and showing interest in a girl from town, Preston and Eliza found themselves sitting on the porch one evening, discussing how quickly time had passed. "He's practically a man now," Preston said, shaking his head in wonder. "Wasn't he just a baby yesterday? It feels that way, doesn't it? But he's growing up well. He's responsible and hardworking and kind. You should be proud." "I am. I'm proud of all of them." Preston reached over and took Eliza's hand. "And I'm proud of us. Look at what we've built together." Eliza squeezed his hand, looking out at the ranch that had become their kingdom. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, the barns were in excellent repair, and the herds were thriving. But more than that, they had created a home full of love and laughter, a place where their children could grow up feeling safe and valued. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Preston asked. "The quiet little house in town, the simple mending work." Eliza thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, but I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. This life with you and the children, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. Even on the hard days, especially on the hard days, because even when things are difficult, we face them together." In 1898, Philip married his sweetheart, a cheerful young woman named Ruth, and brought her to live at the ranch. Preston built them their own small house on the property, and within a year, Eliza became a grandmother for the first time. Holding that tiny baby, her grandson, she felt the circle of life completing itself in a way that was both humbling and joyful. "You're a grandmother now," Preston teased her. "That makes you old." "We're both old," Eliza retorted. "You've got gray in your beard in case you haven't noticed." Distinguished gray. There's a difference. They were in their 50s now, still healthy and active, but definitely showing the wear of years of hard work and hard living. Preston's hands were gnarled from decades of ranch work, and Eliza's eyes were not as sharp as they once were, requiring her to use spectacles for her detailed sewing. But they were happy. Even as their bodies aged and slowed, their love for each other only deepened. They had grown together like two trees planted side by side, their roots intertwining until it was impossible to separate one from the other. One winter evening in 1900, as the new century was just beginning, Eliza was once again mending Preston's socks. It had become a meditation for her, a way to center herself after a busy day. She had been doing this for more than 20 years now, and her hands knew the motions so well she barely had to think about them. Preston was sitting by the fire, reading the newspaper and occasionally commenting on the state of the world. Their youngest children were already in bed, and the house was peaceful in a way it rarely was during the day. "Eliza," Preston said suddenly, setting down the paper. "Come here." She set aside her mending and went to him, settling into his lap despite the fact that they were both too old for such nonsense. He wrapped his arms around her and held her close. "What brought this on?" she asked, but she was smiling. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am. How improbable this all is, that I should have found you, that we should have built this life together. It's not improbable. It's what was meant to happen. Do you really believe that we were meant to find each other?" Eliza thought about the question seriously. She was not sure she believed in fate exactly, but she did believe that some things happened for a reason. "I believe that we were both ready for each other when we met. We were both at a point in our lives where we could appreciate what we had found. If we had met any earlier, it might not have worked." "That's probably true. I needed to do all that wandering before I could appreciate having a home. And I needed to lose James before I could understand what real love felt like." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind howl outside. It was a cold night, the kind where you were grateful for a warm house and a warm body beside you. "You ever think about what comes next?" Preston asked. "When we're too old to work, when the children have all grown and moved on, I think about it sometimes. But mostly I try to enjoy what we have right now. That's wise." He kissed the top of her head. "I hope we have many more years together. I hope we get to see our grandchildren grow up, maybe even great-grandchildren." "I hope so too." As it turned out, they got their wish. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also joys and triumphs. Emma did eventually start breeding horses, building a successful side business that supplemented the ranch's cattle operation. Samuel went away to college, the first Oliver to do so, and became a teacher. Mary married a neighboring rancher's son, and Thomas took over more and more of the day-to-day ranch operations as Preston gradually stepped back. By 1910, when Eliza was 62 and Preston was 63, they had 7 grandchildren and were expecting their 8th. They had officially retired from active ranch management, though Preston still couldn't resist checking on things and offering advice. The big ranch house had been given over to Thomas and his young family, and Eliza and Preston had moved into the original foreman's house, the one where they had started their married life. "It's like coming full circle," Eliza said as they settled into the smaller space. "Back where we began. Except this time we're old and creaky," Preston joked, but they were content. The house was big enough for their needs, and it was peaceful in a way the big house had never been. Eliza could focus on her sewing and quilting without constant interruptions, and Preston could raid and whittle and tinker with projects without feeling like he should be doing something more productive. One afternoon, Eliza was sitting in her favorite chair, mending a pair of Preston's socks. Even after all these years, he still wore holes through them at the same spots. It was a comforting constancy in a world that kept changing. Preston was watching her work, just as he had so many times over the years. "You know," he said, "I think you've mended those same socks about 100 times. More like 1,000. You're very hard on your socks. I'm an old cowboy. It comes with the territory." Eliza looked up at him, this man she had spent more than 3 decades with, and felt her heart swell with love. His face was lined now, weathered by sun and wind and age, and his dark hair had gone completely gray. But his eyes were still the same creek water green, still looking at her with the same warmth and affection they had held that first day. "Do you remember," she said slowly, "that night when you asked me to mend your heart the same way I mended your socks?" "Of course I remember. It was one of the most important nights of my life." "I was thinking about that request, about what it really meant." Preston leaned forward, interested. "And what do you think it meant?" "I think it meant you were asking me to take care with you, to be patient and gentle, to repair the damaged parts without making them worse, to see the value in something that other people might have thrown away. That's exactly what it meant." "And you did all of that and more, Eliza. You didn't just mend my heart, you made it bigger, stronger, capable of more love than I ever thought possible." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "You did the same for me. My heart was so small and closed when we met. James had been kind, but he never really knew me, never really understood who I was. You saw me, Preston. You saw all of me, even the parts I tried to hide, and you loved me anyway." Preston came to kneel beside her chair, his joints protesting the movement but his determination unwavering. He took her hands in his, the mended sock falling forgotten to the floor. "Eliza Wright Oliver," he said formally, "you are the great love of my life. You are the reason I wake up every morning grateful to be alive. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." "And you gave me the same," she whispered. "You taught me what it means to truly love someone, to build a life with someone. You made me happy, Preston. Every single day for the past 32 years, you've made me happy." They kissed then, a soft, gentle kiss between two people who had shared a lifetime together. And in that moment, Eliza understood something she had always known but never quite articulated. Love was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up every day and choosing each other again and again. It was about mending socks and mending hearts and never giving up, even when things got difficult. It was about taking something broken and making it whole. The years that followed were peaceful ones. Eliza and Preston spent their days in quiet companionship, enjoying their grandchildren, working on small projects, and taking pleasure in the simple rhythms of domestic life. They would often sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie, holding hands and remembering. In 1915, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary with a big party that brought together all their children and grandchildren. Philip, now 41, stood up to give a toast. "My parents," he began, "are the finest people I know. They taught us what it means to work hard, to be kind, to stand by your commitments. They showed us what real love looks like, the kind that lasts through good times and bad, through plenty and want, through youth and old age." Eliza looked at her firstborn son, this man she had brought into the world in pain and joy, and felt overwhelmed with pride. All of her children had grown into good people, and she knew that was largely because of the example she and Preston had set. "When I was a boy," Philip continued, "I used to watch Mama mending Papa's socks. I didn't understand then what I was really seeing. I thought it was just a chore, something that had to be done. But now I realize it was an act of love. Every stitch was a promise. Every mended hole was a commitment. Mama took care of Papa in 1,000 small ways, and Papa took care of Mama right back." Preston squeezed Eliza's hand, and she saw that he was crying. She was crying too, overwhelmed by the beauty of this moment, this gathering of the family they had created together. The party went late into the night, filled with laughter and stories and music. Emma played the piano while Samuel sang, and the grandchildren danced in the parlor. It was everything a celebration should be, full of life and love and connection. Later, when everyone had finally gone home or gone to bed, Eliza and Preston sat together on the porch, exhausted but happy. "That was wonderful," Eliza said. "It really was. We've done all right, haven't we, with our life, with our family? We've done better than all right. We've done magnificently." Preston pulled her close, and they sat there under the stars, two old people who had loved each other well and been loved well in return. The prairie stretched out around them, vast and timeless, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "I hope I go first," Preston said suddenly. Eliza pulled back to look at him. "What? Why would you say such a thing?" "Because I can't imagine this world without you in it. I don't want to learn how to live without you." "Well, that's too bad, because I feel the same way." "So we'll just have to live forever," Preston laughed. "That sounds like a fine plan. But of course, they could not live forever. In the spring of 1918, Preston caught pneumonia. He fought it for 2 weeks with Eliza at his bedside the entire time, but his old lungs could not shake the infection. On a rainy April morning, with his wife holding his hand and his children gathered around, Preston Oliver took his last breath. Eliza felt something inside her break when he died, some essential part of herself that she could not name. She had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare herself for it, but nothing could have made her ready for the reality of a world without Preston in it. The funeral was well attended. Preston had been respected throughout the county, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. But Eliza barely noticed any of it. She moved through the days following his death in a daze, going through the motions but feeling nothing. It was Philip who finally pulled her out of it about a week after the funeral. He came to visit her in the little foreman's house where she was sitting in her chair, staring at nothing. "Mama," he said gently, sitting down across from her, "you need to eat something. You need to take care of yourself." "I don't see the point," she said dully. "The point is that Papa would want you to. The point is that we need you. Your children and grandchildren need you." "I'm so tired, Philip. I'm 70 years old and I'm so tired." "I know, Mama, I know." He took her hand. "But you're strong. You're the strongest person I know. You'll get through this." "I don't know if I want to get through it. I don't know if I want to be here without him." Philip was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you remember when I was little and you used to mend Papa's socks? I asked you once why you bothered, why you didn't just throw them away and buy new ones. Do you remember what you told me?" Eliza shook her head. "You said that some things are worth saving. Some things are too precious to just throw away, even when they're damaged. You said that with enough care and patience, most things can be fixed." "I was talking about socks, Philip. But you were also talking about life, about love. Mama, your heart is broken right now. But you taught me that broken things can be mended. You just need care and patience." Eliza looked at her son, this wise, kind man, and felt something shift inside her. "How did you get so smart?" "I learned from the best." Slowly, painfully, Eliza began to heal. She would never stop missing Preston, never stop feeling the ache of his absence, but she learned to live with the grief rather than being consumed by it. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, making sure she was never alone unless she wanted to be. She returned to her mending work, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. It was meditative, soothing, a way to quiet her restless mind. And sometimes, when she was mending someone's torn shirt or worn pants, she would remember Preston and smile through her tears. 2 years after Preston's death, Eliza was sitting in her chair, working on a quilt made from Preston's old clothes. Every piece held a memory: the shirt he had worn when they married, the vest he had favored for church, the work pants he had mended 1,000 times. She was stitching them all together, creating something beautiful from the remnants of their life together, As she worked, she thought about what Philip had said about mending broken things. Preston had asked her to mend his heart, and she had done her best to do so. But in the process, he had mended hers too. They had fixed each other, strengthened each other, made each other whole. And now, even though he was gone, that work continued. The love they had built together lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had created, in the community they had been part of. Preston was gone, but his influence remained, woven through everything like the stitches in her quilts. Eliza lived for another 8 years, surrounded by family and love. She got to see several more of her grandchildren marry and have children of their own. She watched the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's management. She mended countless socks and shirts and pants, her skilled fingers never losing their precision. When she finally died in the summer of 1926, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, her children found her bedroom full of quilts. There were quilts made from their baby clothes, quilts made from Preston's things, quilts that told the story of their family in fabric and thread. Each one was a work of art, meticulously crafted with love and care. At her funeral, Philip stood up to speak. He was nearly 52 now, his own hair going gray, but he could still remember the young mother who had read him stories and taught him about the value of patience and care. "My mother," he said, his voice strong despite his tears, "was the finest woman I ever knew. She had a gift for seeing the potential in broken things, for understanding that something damaged could still be valuable. She mended my father's heart, and he mended hers, and together they created something beautiful." He held up one of Eliza's quilts, the one made from Preston's clothes. "This quilt tells their story. Every piece is something my father wore, something my mother preserved and transformed. It's a testament to their love, to the care they took with each other and with all of us." After the service, they buried Eliza next to Preston in the small cemetery on the ranch. The headstone was simple. Eliza Wright Oliver, 1848–1926. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she mended broken things with love. The years passed, and the Oliver Ranch continued to thrive. Preston and Eliza's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried on their legacy, working the land and caring for each other just as they had been taught. The story of the cowboy with the worn-out socks and the widow who mended them became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. And in the little foreman's house, where it had all begun, there was a framed pair of socks hanging on the wall. They were old and faded, darned in multiple places with careful, even stitches. According to family tradition, these were the very first socks Eliza had ever mended for Preston, the ones that had brought them together. No one knew for sure if the story was true, but it did not really matter. The socks had become a symbol of something larger, a reminder that love often begins in the most ordinary moments. A reminder that broken things can be mended, that lonely hearts can find each other, that with enough care and patience, something beautiful can be created from the most unlikely materials. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the prairie and the sun set in a blaze of color, you could almost feel their presence still lingering in that little house. Preston and Eliza, still together after all these years, still showing their descendants what it means to love well and live fully. The mending room, which had been Eliza's domain for so many years, was preserved by the family as a kind of shrine. Her sewing basket still sat by the window, her spools of thread still lined the shelves. And sometimes, when Thomas's daughters or granddaughters needed a quiet place to think, they would come sit in that room and pick up a needle and thread. Because Eliza had taught them all, directly or indirectly, that there was value in the work of hands and hearts. That the patient labor of mending and creating was not just practical but sacred. That every stitch was a small act of faith in the future, a belief that broken things could be made whole again. By the time the Oliver Ranch celebrated its 100th anniversary in 1987, it was being run by Preston and Eliza's great-great-grandchildren. The family gathered for a massive reunion, with relatives coming from all over the country. They toured the old buildings, told the old stories, and marveled at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. The foreman's house was opened for the occasion, and people filed through reverently, looking at the preserved mending room and the framed socks and the photographs of Preston and Eliza that lined the walls. There was something moving about seeing where it had all started, this dynasty of love and work and commitment. One of the great-great-granddaughters, a young woman named Eliza after her ancestor, stood in the mending room for a long time. She had brought her boyfriend to the reunion, and she wanted him to understand where she came from, what her family valued. "My great-great-grandfather was a cowboy who needed his socks mended," she explained. "And my great-great-grandmother was a widow who knew how to use a needle." It seems like such a small thing, doesn't it? Just socks. But those socks brought them together, and they created all of this. She gestured widely, encompassing not just the house but the ranch beyond, the family gathered outside, the whole sprawling legacy of Preston and Eliza's love. "That's beautiful," her boyfriend said. "It is. And the thing is, they weren't special people. They were just ordinary people who chose to love each other well. They mended each other's broken hearts and they built a life together, and now here we all are." Young Eliza picked up an old spool of thread from the shelf and turned it over in her hands. "I want that," she said softly. "I want to build something that lasts. I want to love someone the way they loved each other." Her boyfriend took her hand. "Then let's do it. Let's build something that lasts." And in that moment, in that room where it had all begun more than a century ago, another love story started. The thread of connection that Preston and Eliza had first woven continued to extend forward, touching new lives, creating new possibilities. Because that was the real legacy they had left behind. Not just the ranch or the money or the family name, but the example of what love could be when it was tended carefully and faithfully. They had shown that two broken people could make each other whole, that ordinary moments could become extraordinary, that the simple act of mending something with care could become a metaphor for an entire life. Preston had asked Eliza to mend his heart the same way she mended his socks, and she had done exactly that, with patience and precision and love, with steady hands and a generous spirit. And in return, he had mended her heart too, filling the empty places with joy and purpose and belonging. Their story was not unique in its elements. Countless cowboys had fallen in love with countless women across the American West, but the way they had loved each other, the care they had taken with each other's hearts, that was something special. That was something worth remembering and honoring and trying to emulate. As the sun set on the Oliver Ranch that anniversary day, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors it had done for more than a century, the family gathered for a photograph. More than 200 people, all descended from Preston and Eliza, all carrying forward their legacy in one way or another. And if you looked closely at that photograph, you could see it in their faces. The strength and kindness and determination that had defined Preston and Eliza lived on in their descendants. The capacity for love, for commitment, for seeing value in broken things, all of it was still there. The ranch continued for many more years, adapting and changing with the times but never losing sight of the values on which it was founded. And in the foreman's house, Eliza's mending room remained a place of pilgrimage for family members who wanted to connect with their roots and remember where they came from. The framed socks hung on the wall, a testament to the truth that love often begins in the most ordinary moments. That a simple request for mending could lead to a lifetime of devotion. That broken hearts, like worn-out socks, could be made whole again with enough care and patience. Preston and Eliza had been gone for decades, but their love story lived on. It lived on in the land they had worked, in the family they had raised, in the values they had instilled. It lived on in every act of kindness and care, in every patient mending of something broken, in every choice to love well despite the risks and difficulties. They had started with nothing but worn-out socks and lonely hearts, but they had built something magnificent. And that something continued to grow and flourish long after they were gone, a living testament to the power of love to transform and redeem and create beauty from the most unlikely materials. That was the story of Preston Oliver and Eliza Wright. A cowboy and a widow, brought together by necessity and bound together by choice. Two people who had asked each other to mend their broken hearts and had spent the rest of their lives doing exactly that, one careful stitch at a time.